this is a campaign by the Chinese government to silence dissent on U.S. soil. My name's Roman Rozhovsky. I'm the Assistant Director of the Counterintelligence and Espionage Division for the FBI.
Transnational repression. How much of a national security threat is this phenomenon?
It's a huge priority for our adversaries, such as China, Russia, and Iran. So it's a huge priority for us. And we're seeing more and more of these cases, and we're seeing escalating tactics, everything, from assassination, forced kidnapping to harassment, hiring organized crime or private investigators to go after people on U.S. soil. So it's a big issue for us.
Have the activities intensified?
Yes. In the last few years, they've definitely intensified, and the tactics have escalated to, violence and kidnapping and, murder for hire.
What is transnational repression?
So it's a broad, complicated topic. I would summarize it as anytime someone criticizes an authoritarian government, usually, or just any foreign government, and then that government comes after the person on U.S. soil and tries to silence them through a variety of tactics.
What specifically have you seen the Chinese government doing here in the U.S.?
So in some of our cases, we've seen them send officials here to harass individuals. We've seen them hire private investigators to surveil people. We've seen them hire private investigators to try to get them to commit violence against individuals. We've seen them hire private investigators to destroy things, such as there was a statue of Xi Jinping in California that criticized COVID policies, and they hired a private investigator who burned it down. We've seen them threaten the families of these people who are still in China. We've seen them recruit U.S. government officials to try to get database access to see when an individual would travel so they could try to arrest him.
Are all of these activities illegal?
Most of them are. There are some loopholes that they take advantage of. So, for example, if I'm a Chinese intelligence officer and I want to surveil you, I can hire a private investigator to follow you on a public street.
An American
private investigator, and that's currently not illegal. So that is a loophole they've been taking advantage of. However, if that private investigator does something illegal, then it becomes illegal, and we can prosecute under the Agent of a Foreign Power Act.
There was a case, a prosecution indictment a couple of years ago, and the case is ongoing, involving allegations of a secret Chinese police station.
Yes. We had been investigating this before the report came out, and it was a police station that was covertly set up in Manhattan, and we executed a search warrant and arrested and indicted 2 individuals that were running the police station. I can't say much about the prosecutions because they're still ongoing, but I can say that in the indictment we described how one of those 2 individuals was tasked by an MPS official in China to find a dissident that was the campaign manager for a former Tiananmen Square protester who was running for Congress in New York.
What is your reaction when you hear about, in your words, establishing a secret police station on U.S. soil?
It is a gross breach of U.S. sovereignty, and we were all surprised when we found out about this, and you can imagine the reaction if the FBI tried to set up a covert station in Beijing. So it's shut down now, and obviously the U.S. government does not appreciate what China did with that.
From what I understand, in that particular case, it involves a Chinese kind of home association where you have almost clubs that are people of Chinese origin that still have ties back to home. How much of a concern are things like this in emigre communities that might cross a line?
There is a lot of concern, and that's kind of the point of transnational repression, right? So I often get asked, is this effective? The tactics are often crude, burning down a statue or threatening people. But the main goal is to create a climate of fear in the community, right? So for every brave person that's willing to speak out, there are, probably 1,000 people that choose to stay silent and censor themselves. And
Here in the U.S.?
Here in the U.S. And that's really the point of transnational repression, right? Like they do these very overt things to scare the rest of the community, and they recruit people to report within the community. So they're creating this Orwellian climate of fear where everyone is afraid to speak out even though they're on U.S. soil and it's their right to do so. And so, yes, it is a major concern in the Chinese diaspora, that someone will report them to the Chinese government and the Chinese government will retaliate against their family or in some other way.
Do you hear that from citizens of Chinese origin here in the U.S.?
Definitely. I've done victim interviews where I've heard that many times, where victims will say, I don't want to cooperate with you because I don't want them to come after my family, my elderly parents, or whoever is still back in China. It has become a lot more brazen over the last few years, and we're trying very hard to, bring these cases to light and to tell the entire story of how this is being directed from the highest levels of the Chinese government. In another example, we had a professor that came over in the early 2000s who started basically a fake pro-democracy foundation so he could keep tabs on the real pro-democracy activists. So it's been very aggressive and widespread. And
from what you're describing, it sounds like there are different levels of American society that have actually been compromised at this point.
Absolutely.
And infiltrated, basically.
Right.
Can you describe the scale of resources that the FBI employs to combat this?
It is a priority for us. We have hundreds of people working on this.
Should people here in the U.S. be paranoid and looking over their shoulders for agents or proxies of foreign adversaries?
If you're a vocal dissident with a large following, I would say yes.
It's that dangerous?
Yes.
Here in the U.S.?
Yes. If you're popular and vocal and have a very large following, you'll be seen as a threat by these governments.
If the threat is so real here in the U.S., do you have estimates of how many people might be acting as proxies for or as agents for a government like China here?
I couldn't give you exact numbers because, but I...
Is it in the hundreds or thousands?
I think hundreds would be accurate.
Does the same go for other countries, other governments like Iran and Russia?
Yes.
Are we talking about hundreds?
Well, their resources are far more limited than China's. China has vast resources to deploy against this problem, whereas Russia, to deploy for this purpose. Russia and Iran are far more limited. So I would not say hundreds for them.
But that brings an interesting kind of comparison. You've said that the FBI has hundreds of agents tasked to deal with transnational repression, and you're saying China alone potentially has hundreds of proxies and people involved in this criminal activity here.
Yes, we are out-resourced by China in many areas.
On U.S. territory?
Yes.
That's a startling admission.
Let me qualify that. Because of how interconnected the world is now, individuals don't have to necessarily be on U.S. soil to engage in these activities. So when I say we're outnumbered, it's not specifically on U.S. soil.